You're standing in a black hollow at midnight. The air smells like wood smoke and corn mash. Somewhere down the ridge, a copper still hisses behind a wall of fog the moonshiner made on purpose. A flashlight beam cuts through the trees. He doesn't run. He already knows you'll never find him, because the men who ran liquor through these mountains weren't criminals. They were engineers, chemists, trackers. They built a hidden economy on 25 tricks so clever that most of them died in the grave with the last old-timer who knew them. What I'm about to tell you came from a notebook my great-uncle Roy kept under a loose board in his smokehouse in Patrick County, Virginia. He passed in 1991. I was 19. I wish to God I'd asked him more questions while he was still on that porch, chewing tobacco and watching the road. The final trick in this video, the 25th one, came straight out of a 1937 oral history recorded in Wilkes County, North Carolina, and you will never hear it on television. It works whether you live on 500 acres or in a third-floor apartment in Cleveland. The first thing they understood was the smoke. A still throws a column of vapor visible for 2 miles on a still morning. So the old blockaders learned to run their fires only when fog rolled into the hollow. My grandfather called it cooking with the Lord's cover. They'd watch the barometer for 3 days, wait for that wet, low sky, and only then light the firebox. The smoke disappeared into the fog before it climbed 10 feet. A man named Amos Owens, the Cherokee Bald Moonshiner, was famous for never lighting a fire on a clear day for 41 years. But fog wasn't always available. Therefore, they learned the second trick: dry hardwood only. Hickory, white oak, locust, never pine, never green wood. A seasoned hickory fire throws almost no visible smoke and almost no smell beyond 10 yards. Roy told me once that a green pine fire would get a man 5 years in Atlanta Federal Pen. A hickory fire kept you free. The third trick was the worm box. Most folks today think the worm, that copper coil that condenses the vapor, just sits in cold water. The old men knew better. They'd dig the worm box into a running creek, but they'd line the upstream side with charcoal from their own firebox. The charcoal pulled iron and tannins out of the mountain water before it ever touched the copper. That's why old mountain whiskey tasted clean and modern bootleg often tastes like a penny. Foxfire, Volume 1, published in 1972, has a single paragraph on this from a man named Buck Carver. One paragraph, that's all that survived in print. Here's where the story turns dark. Somebody benefited from erasing all of this. In 1934, 1 year after Prohibition supposedly ended, the federal government raised the excise tax on legal liquor to a level that made small mountain distilling impossible. It wasn't morality, it was money. The big distillers in Kentucky and Maryland paid senators to write a tax code that crushed every family operation from West Virginia down to North Georgia. The Great Moonshine Conspiracy Trial of 1935 in Franklin County, Virginia, indicted 34 people, including the sheriff and the Commonwealth's attorney, because the entire county was running liquor and the federal men couldn't stop it any other way. Franklin County earned its nickname, the wettest county in the world, in those court transcripts. So the moonshiners went deeper. They learned the fourth trick, sound masking. They'd set up their stills near waterfalls or fast shoals so the constant white noise of the water covered the bubbling of the mash and the crackle of the firebox. A revenuer standing 50 feet away couldn't hear a thing. Big Six Henderson, the legendary North Carolina revenue agent, wrote in his 1958 field notes that he once walked within 20 feet of an active still 3 times before he found it, because the creak was so loud. The fifth trick was the false trail. Every still site had 2 paths in. One looked obvious, well-worn, easy to spot. That one led to nothing. A clearing, an old shack, a pile of rusted barrels. The real path was a single line of stepping stones across a creek bed, leaving no boot prints. My Uncle Roy told me his daddy made him walk the stones in his stocking feet for a year before he was allowed to know where the still actually sat. Now, if you live in the city and you're thinking this only applies to folks with a hollow in the back of their property, stay with me, because this next part is specifically for you. The Moonshiners developed something called scent masking, and it works in any kitchen, any garage, any apartment. When they were aging product or storing it, they understood that smell travels, so they kept a small dish of roasted coffee grounds and a dish of white vinegar near any storage area. The coffee absorbs volatile aromatics. The vinegar neutralizes alcohol vapor. Together, in a closed room, they reduce detectable scent by an enormous margin. Folks today use this trick for all kinds of legal reasons, keeping a workshop from smelling like solvent, keeping a pantry from smelling like fermentation when you're making sauerkraut or sourdough. It came straight out of the hollow, and it works in a Manhattan studio apartment. The sixth trick was the signal system. Mountain families could not use telephones. The lines were tapped by 1929, so they used laundry. A red shirt on the line meant revenuers in the county. A white sheet meant all clear. A pair of blue overalls hung upside down meant get the still cold and get out now. Every wife and daughter in 3 counties knew the code. The federal men never figured it out because they were looking for radios and runners, not laundry. The 7th trick was the burial method for finished product. They didn't hide jars in barns or attics. Those were the first places searched. They buried glass half-gallon jars wrapped in oilcloth 4 feet down under the chicken coop. The chickens kept the ground scratched and disturbed, so a fresh dig was invisible. Maggie Bailey, the famous Clovertown, Kentucky moonshiner, who sold liquor for 60 years and died at 95 in 2005, kept her stock buried under a hog pen. No federal agent was going to crawl through hog manure with a shovel. The 8th through 24th tricks I'll cover quickly because the 25th is what you came here for. They knew to test proof with a shake and read the bead. They knew to thump twice on the thump keg to clear sediment. They knew copper had to be cleaned with cornmeal and vinegar, never soap. They knew the first cup of any run was poison and went in the dirt. They knew to age in charred white oak for color and smoothness. They knew which neighbors to trust and which to feed false information to. They knew never to sell to a stranger who paid in new bills. But the 25th trick, the one that came out of that 1937 Wilkes County oral history recorded by a WPA folklorist named Mary Celestia Parler and buried in the East Tennessee State University archives of Appalachia until a researcher pulled it in the 1980s. The old man being interviewed, his name was Jess Carter, said his father taught him to never, ever run a still on the same site twice in a row, even if it was perfect, even if nothing went wrong, because the federal men weren't tracking smoke or smell. They were tracking ground heat. A still site stays warm in the soil for 3 to 4 days after a run, and a good tracking dog could find a cold site a week later by the dead vegetation in a 6-foot circle. So the Carter family rotated through 9 sites on their property, each one used once every 2 months. The federal men never caught a Carter, not in 3 generations. The trick was patience. The trick was rotation. The trick was understanding that the enemy wasn't watching, he was reading the earth itself. That knowledge existed for 150 years in those mountains. The federal government tried to erase it with tax codes and prison sentences. One family in Wilkes County wrote it down before the last man died, and now you have it. These men weren't running from the law because they were bad. They were running because somebody in Washington decided their way of life was worth less than a tax receipt. Every trick I just gave you is a piece of your inheritance, whether your people came from Appalachia or not, because this is the knowledge that built rural America before rural America was sold off. If you are the kind of man who believes the real skills this country was built on have been quietly buried to protect somebody else's profit, you already know what to do next. Tell me in the comments which trick you'd heard before from your own grandfather or great uncle, and which one was new to you. Was it the laundry signals, the chicken coop burial, the ground heat rotation the Carter family used in Wilkes County? And tell me what state or country you're watching from tonight. I read every comment on that porch with my coffee in the morning. If you want to keep recovering this knowledge with the rest of us, the men who refuse to let our grandfather's wisdom die in a federal archive, you know where the subscribe button is. Next time, I'm going to tell you about the mountain medicine cabinet, the 7 plants that grew within 50 feet of every still in Appalachia, and why the Moonshiners needed every one of them to survive the work. One of them is probably growing in your yard right now, and you have no idea what it can do.